Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I don't think we need to do introductions. We have the full committee here and also Board Chair Wong and also Board Member Scott. Do we have any public comment? Nope. Okay, great. All right, so the first item on the agenda is our cell phone policy, and we, for the last several meetings, have had a discussion about the draft and various issues related to or potential elements in a cell phone policy, including the just draft we were using as somewhat of a straw man. And we also have had in the field a student survey. Is it out yet? I think it should be out.
It went out on the 20th of September and closed on the 30th of September.
Okay, so I want to thank JJ for working with Dr. Adams and putting that together and getting that out. There also are going to be focus groups, or have been.
I think they are going to be. I don't know if they have
Okay.
happened. And I that's speculative on my part. I actually don't know the dates of the focus groups.
And we will have, is Dr. Adams presenting at the October 15th?
21st.
The meeting on the 21st.
Yes, October 21st.
So we didn't want to move ahead with more changes to the policy or get too far down the road without getting student feedback. So on the 21st, we should have both the focus groups from the schools that currently have, I would say, an enforced school-wide policy, and also the results of a survey. JJ, were students taking the survey, or did you see evidence of it at McDaniels?
Yeah, I know some students took the survey, but I know there was also lots of students who weren't aware of this survey coming out, because I know it was only posted on private.
Great. And I see that Director Hollins has also joined. Only Director Green is missing. Okay. So since the last meeting, and as a way to continue to move things forward between now and when we get the student feedback, we gave all board members an opportunity to share their thoughts on core elements, and in some cases core elements that shouldn't be in the policy. And so we have what we did is we put together a consolidated list of that, of all the ones we received up until I think yesterday, and that should be posted at least in the board members' books. So we have it consolidated, and what we tried to do is Liz and I go through and find the common themes of core elements that were either in that people wanted to see in a district policy, or that were in the draft sort of committee's straw man. And from that, we have a document that was sent around to everyone from last night that is titled Annotated Draft, and it has those here. So the one that's got the highlights on it. So try to put together sort of what would be described as sort of 6 different categories, and from the 6 categories are breadth of policy decisions, scope of restrictions, nature of exceptions, consequence for student misuse, district support, and then required compliance information. And I'm just going to dispense with the last one first, because I think that's the easiest. It's the items that district council says we need to have in the policy, to have it in there. So I think that's the easiest one.
What does it say?
What are those?
Well,
It's from ORS 336.840, which is, that requires certain components in a policy about the use of personal electronic devices.
so
the
we'll
appeal
we'll
policy,
share it
Yeah.
around, but it's less of a sort of policy, but more.
It was in the last draft that the policy committee looked at when we had the draft, discussion draft.
Exemptions?
No. There are parts of the exemptions are also satisfying that statute, but we thought those were in a different group. They needed to be grouped together in section 3, but that is also compliance-related language, to be fair.
So for the other categories, going through them and looking at what would be items that would be more likely to be in policy at a high level, and then those items that would be more likely to be in an AD because they were operational, more detailed, or the nature of it is that they could continue, whatever the issue could be a continuously evolving issue, so that it's changing and you don't want to be, you want your policy to be more, I don't want to say timeless because nothing's timeless, but more time durable. So if you look through the document, you can see where, and again, this is for discussion, the items that would be, again, higher level policy, and then those would be AD, and then a third category would be other, not necessarily in policy or in ADs. The example I'm going to use would be the general tools and processes for parents to reach students and students contacting parents during the school day. So that would really be around, you have a phone available for students in the office, or, parents have there's hours that they can call and get a person if they need to contact their student and get a message to their student. But those wouldn't be something that you would dictate in a policy or put in an AD, but would be how a school would operationalize it. So those are the three categories, and we can just start with the very first one, which is the breadth of the policy decision. And to me, this is probably the biggest one, which is the district setting some sort of restriction or minimum standard. And then the other would be actually currently what we have now, which is schools restricting at their discretion. So essentially not a district-wide policy. So I'll just open it up if people have points of view.
I definitely think it should be district-wide. Personally, I'd love it to be all day.
Well, let's hold that thought to the scope of the restrictions, because this, the district restricting, I think we're starting at a minimum with a class, during class time, having a single standard. You can, or Michelle, anybody jump in. This is
Sure.
we're in a committee. It's more unstructured.
Yeah, go next.
Yeah,
I guess.
thank you.
I'll let Michelle. Go ahead.
And I'm getting a weird feedback. I don't know if anybody else is getting that. Would be in favor of restricting, providing a minimum for the district, with schools having the discretion to be more restrictive. And that said, I do like the all-day policy because of what we heard from Principal McGee, in that the poor behavior is showing up during passing and lunch times. And so if part of what we're trying to solve for is, bullying or bad behavior, those times that I would think a all day off and away would be my preference.
Yeah, I'll go next. Yeah, I just want to share something that a teacher at Benson shared with me, saying that, I'll just read a couple of quotes here and there, saying that, now they have an off and away policy in the classroom, but it's still allowed in the hallways and during lunch. He said, for the most part, in the classroom, things are okay. However, outside the classroom is a different story. Students are all over the halls with cell phones out, sitting on benches, walking down the hall, which means they're not in class. They get restroom pass and go sit on their phone. In their halls, the cell phone policy is almost impossible to enforce. There's not enough security to really help, and most teachers are teaching, and the ones who are available are in planning. So just really quick, so yeah, I mean, my preference is all day, but I think the big thing I prefer to push is that currently, if there's some kind of policy that's not very, not mandated, it's a values or a goal, and maybe for this next year, how it looks and how it enforces an all-day policy, like all day, if that makes sense. Like, for example, in medicine, practices are always being updated, right? Bloodletting was cool, 100 years ago, but it's not so cool today. There's no policy that says no bloodletting. It's a goal saying that we will continue best practices, right? And so I got two components. One, I would prefer a policy that says something like we need to take into account the best practices, right? That is shown either through the district or nationally what the evidence says, and the evidence is pretty strong that like for example, I'll give you an example. If through Grant using Yonder and Lincoln is using the lock boxes, we discover that Lincoln's lock boxes are just amazing, and student scores are going up, and or their performances are doing better, and there's seems like there's mental health, and even anecdotally, teachers are having the feedback from teachers is overwhelmingly positive, and that is the best system, right? Maybe it's not Yonder pouches. Then my thing with the policy is that then all schools should have access to that best system, right? Because the problem I think we're facing today with a lot of schools is that a lot of principals have stated that they felt like they're on their own. So one school might get one thing, and another school, they can't afford that thing, so now they have to do something else. And I think that is where I would, I prefer a policy to kind of solve for it. A statement of values, like, for example, equitable practices, right?
Get to that.
Yeah, and so I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit. But, one of the things about, what if someone comes up with an amazing technique 3 years from now, like, for example, an app that uses AI that turns off people's phones when they're not supposed to be using them automatically, right? We could use that. So, a policy needs to, I don't know, that's kind of where I'm at.
So, just making some thoughts on that is that that's more of the how. So the concept is, we know students are more focused on instruction and more engaged in classroom when they aren't using a phone. That's like kind of the what, when they aren't using phones or electronic devices. The how, to me, is like what you're talking about is like, that's what I was referencing on things evolving is like you leave that to the staff to adapt. It's like, oh, there's a brand new technology that allows for some much easier way to enforce the what, but you wouldn't put it in policy because the timeless thing is like we're not going to have electronic devices generally in classes. And the how piece, which will continue to evolve, seems like, or the best practice, that's more operational and can be in the AD, and so you don't have to change it every time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was my point. It's like, yeah, so thanks for reiterating that. The how should be easily adaptable, and therefore shouldn't be in the policy. the policy should be a value, a goal, right? Something that, and also enforceable, you know, like for example, if there was policy that says something like, you know, in district shall practice best practice in terms of smart devices in the scope of mental health and classroom management and teacher workload and student performance, and ensure that that practice is equitable through the whole district, right? Then let's say, for example, we have a situation in the future that, you know, let's just say Yonder pouches were the best, you know, the results were amazing with that. And Benson can't afford Yonder pouches. We shouldn't ever have that kind of situation. Again, I'm just using Yonder as an example. I'm not saying it's the best. Maybe Lockbox, maybe AI is the best, or Skynet, or but yeah, I think yeah. So thank you. You kind of iterated exactly where I was going with that.
Yeah, well, in Director Scott's email, it was very simple. The board policy would state the board directs the superintendent to prohibit the use of cell phones by students during the school day. That's the policy.
Oh, I got it.
We're gonna get that. Go ahead and,
Yeah.
why don't
Yeah.
you jump in?
Well, I was going to agree, actually, Director Burmowitz, with your point. I mean, I think the question I keep asking on each one of these is like, what's policy and what's not, and just to, you know, even, you know, I really appreciate, because I'm hearing also from you know, administrators and teachers saying, oh, this is really hard to implement. Personally, I don't think we're going to solve implementation issues through the policy. I think implementation issues will be solved through an administrative directive, you know, at the district level. And they're important for sure, but I think, you know, and I'll give an example, right? We could pass a policy that says the district, the superintendent or the district, however, you know, will minimize the use of cell phones during the day. Or we could pass a policy that says the district will prohibit the use of cell phones during the day. Those will result in very different administrative directives, right? And you know, and so that's the value statement. Are we trying to minimize it? Are we trying to say, hey, you know, we recognize there's going to be some uses here and there, but you know, students can use it in the hallway, the bathroom, you know, lunch, whatever. Or are we trying to say, you know, no, there's nothing. Obviously, the exceptions, you know, that are listed would come into play. But I feel like that's where I would want to focus our time as a board. You know, what are we trying to say from a values perspective? And we can do that pretty quickly. And then I think the administrative directive is going to take some time in terms of how, you know, how it actually gets implemented in the schools.
Director Brim Edwards, I'm getting text messages that people can't hear you because your mic wasn't on.
Okay.
Sorry.
I actually think this could be less than a one-page policy. And with a much longer administrative directive. And, you know, I think about the administrative directive, it's like we're trying to recreate the past in some ways. You know, how do you support students who don't have access to communicating with everybody? But obviously we did it for 70 or 80 years, so I'm sure we can figure it out. Gary, or Director Hollins, do you have anything generally on this very first broad topic about whether we should have a district-wide policy or essentially leave it to the schools?
Thank you. I'm getting an echo too. I think we do a district-wide policy, and like what Director Scott was saying, if we are going to prohibit, then we need to be able to have resources to assist our principals with that. If we're going to say we're going to basically minimize it, then it has to be something that, as a district, that we can do across all the schools. And I think we need to be clear as well. If we have a policy that's vague but not concise and direct, then I think, like, and if I make sure I heard it right, what Director Scott was saying, Director Scott was saying was that you're going to have different implementations at different schools for different principals, and I don't know what's the difference that they're doing now versus what we're going to pass if it's vague enough to where they can make their own decisions anyway.
Yeah, Sorry, Gary, I didn't know if you were done. Yeah, I think the way I think about it is that feels like if we say we want to prohibit cell phones during the use of school day, with a few exceptions, then my expectation would be the superintendent will draft an administrative directive that does that in schools throughout the district. I think what I'm hesitant to do is, and actually, Eddie, you've been making this point, like, you have to do it in one particular way, right? Because it's possible that for whatever reason, because of the particular student body, the particular school, or the configuration, the administrative directive may allow some flexibility in terms of, how it's done. But I wouldn't expect there would be a difference in terms of the outcome. So the means of getting there may be different, or maybe not. Maybe the superintendent says, hey, we're going to have one standard, we're going to have one way to do this, it's going to be consistent across the district. As a board member, I don't want to be making that decision for the entire district. I want to be saying, here's our high-level principle, and then, or value, principle gets confusing, here's our high-level value, and then let the district staff sort of figure out the best way to implement it so that we have that consistent outcome in the end.
I think we have, nobody said we want to continue to have all of this just set at the school level. I think what I've heard is a consensus that a sort of district-wide floor. And then maybe the second piece, I'm going to go into what I think is maybe the easiest piece, would be just like class time, sort of like this restriction that like in classes, electronic devices, and we're going to get the exceptions later, so we can. This just in general, the district. Think about a district-wide policy. What is the policy? Because if we set again this from my perspective, like in class is setting the floor, and then when you continue down into the scope of restrictions, then you have a whole. You could have a higher floor. Or you could be adding a couple stories. Does anyone, knowing that we're going to get to exceptions, have an issue with class time being a time in which we're saying no electronic devices?
I would prefer to have it be all day.
We're going to get there,
Okay.
but we're starting with the floor, which is class time.
Okay, got it.
What-
I would want it higher
Okay,
than the
we're
floor.
going to get to there number two. I just want, because I do think that's when we're going to start seeing some differentiation, and it will also, that'll be, when we get beyond class time, it'll also become a time in which, like, how it gets implemented could be very different and lead to different outcomes. JJ, do you have a point of view either on the, and I'm sorry, I didn't call on you on do you have a point of view on the district-wide versus individual schools setting the?
I primarily just have like questions on like the implementation of the policy.
Okay. Anyone have an issue with setting a standard at class as a floor? And we're going to get to the other issues in a moment.
Okay, floor meaning you could just have it be.
I think
In
what you're
class.
asking is nobody wants to go less than that. And
I'm
what
just
hearing-
wanting
what I'm
to
hearing Patty
establish
say
that.
is, you may want to go more, but there's no one on the board that wants to say,
That's what I'm trying to
Yes.
establish, yes. Okay,
All
I
right.
think I've got a consensus. Okay, so we're gonna, and I think this will be, we should, maybe have people share where they are on each of these next, at least the first three. And then maybe share where you are, and then we can have a discussion about it. And I'm gonna dispense with on the last one, use of phones for photos, videos complies with PPS policies. We frankly just have a reference in there, so people would know that if you're using your phones, if it's allowed at any point in time, that you still have to comply with the district policies. Again, that's probably like a one sentence, reference to the other policies, so you have everything in one place. So, does anybody want to start with their point of view on the three options? Because, we can just go there and see how much agreement there may be, and you don't have to have a position if you don't have one already.
Hello?
Gary?
If you don't mind, can you, say what those options are as I'm on my opinion?
Yeah, sure. So it's school hours versus school activities. So that would be sort of beyond the school day, but if you're still on school grounds, that's the first one. The second one is passing time. And the third one is lunchtime. And I think you can have a point of view, and a point of view could be, I think this should be set in the AD. And I'll just start with, I think it should be set in the AD.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Sorry, Patty, before you go. Julie, when you say set in the AD, set in the AD consistently for the whole district, or set in the AD with flexibility, school by school?
I guess I would leave that to the
superintendent.
To the district staff. Because when we get down into sort of like the supports, I have not heard a consistent, and again, this is also, I will say, if we're saying that they're restricted in the classroom, in the policy, but schools may choose to have more restrictions, then the flexibility, to me, that allows a school to say it's not a passing time and not a lunch.
Okay, I have heard the teachers ask for something strong from us. It is not strong if we say, you can either do just classroom or you can do all day. Then they're going to have the students saying, oh, you don't have to do that, and we're going to rebel against that. And I think we have to be courageous and say, hey, that's it. I mean, we know, well, we don't know for sure. I mean, maybe all this research is wrong. We know what the teachers are saying. I think we just have to be strong and say, no cell phones during the school day. 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock, whatever it is. And you keep talking about a floor. I think the policy should say that. Then there's no floor. The policy would say it's strong.
So you would say that the policy would be district restricts all the school hours, or school hours and school activities?
I'd say school hours.
Well, you're going weak on us.
I know. I mean, well, they can hardly
I'm just giving you a hard time.
Yeah, they can hardly use it while they're playing football anyway. So, I think once school's out, if they want to use their cell phone, fine. That's
I
my
just-
feeling.
I just go on the record, I think that's something that the principals at those schools should decide. Because they're the ones that's on the ground, we're not. And so I think it would be something that maybe the AD and however the AD let staff decide, how they want to implement that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like we were saying before, I just care about the end result practice that's being held. So, I guess here's my issue, right? Like, there's already a growing body of evidence it's strongly showing that there's an increase in student performance when schools do have all-day bans. and the growth, the increase in student performance is especially stronger among the lowest performing kids. And again, maybe it's definitive by now, but it is definitely a growing body of evidence. If that's true, right, in our board goals specifically state, right, we are trying to increase the performance, especially among the groups that are historically been disadvantaged. My point of view is that if this is showing that this works, it is, for me, it's almost like a moral obligation that we need to at least do something, right? Get us closer there. So, I'm in support of Patty in terms of an all-day ban. One of the issues I know, as a former teacher, the more complicated you make it, the more difficult it is to enforce, right? In terms of classroom management, when I have rules in the classroom, they say limited to 3, because that's about the attention span of the average human, right? And when it gets too complicated, like, oh, you can have it then, but you can't have it now, then that's when you get into enforcement issues and trouble. And the teachers have been overwhelmingly asking, we need help with this, right? Having teachers enforce a policy has been difficult. It hasn't been working. And so to kind of let that keep going is almost not responsive, not being responsive. So I guess my point is that I'm not sure if I'm for policy that specifically says that we need to ban it all day during class hours. I mean, maybe that is the way, but I'm more into a policy that says, like, we need to follow best practices, and the best practices are showing that this is working way better than that, right? An all day policy or school policy is better than, oh, you can have it during lunch and passing periods. And so whatever we pass, I think, as long as the end result results in schools doing what's been showing to work better, again, I'm saying better, in quotes, that's what the policy should be. And right now, the evidence is strongly supportive of an all-day thing or during class hours. So that's where I'm supporting now. What the policy specifically says, we could be flexible. I'd rather it be a very high-level thing so that the AD is what addresses it, and the AD is allowed to be more flexible and change with the times. So I would prefer a policy that makes it so that the AD is what's banning. I rephrase. If the policy is what's making compelling an AD to be written, that if today the best practice is to ban it during school hours, that's the AD, right? So that's kind of where I'm at.
I'm wondering, when you have a chance, can you send us the data of, because I haven't seen data, or maybe I wasn't zeroing in on whether it's all day or whether it's not in the classroom. So I haven't seen that distinction made of, like, you get the big gains when it's not in passing time or at lunch versus it's not happening during class time. It'd be great to just see that data.
You mean the data
Yeah.
from where?
That was
From
shared with
different
us before from
teachers?
a bunch of a teacher work group shared a bunch of data with us earlier.
Yeah, maybe refresh it, because I don't recall
Sure,
it being,
I'll ask for it
I don't
again, yeah.
recall it, because my recollection is the data I've seen has been like, no cell phones in class leads to more engaged students and increased student achievement. I haven't seen it where it's like, you get the big increase when you don't allow it during passing time and lunchtime. So that's what I
And
just.
I also want to add that the all day during passing time and lunchtime is also solving for other problems. Like, for example, kids skipping out of class, going on supposedly restroom breaks, or kids during lunchtime not even talking to each other. The social hour. And we know socialization is a huge part of brain development and growing, just growing in general. We're talking about bullying, right? It's something for bullying. So, I mean, there probably is data. It's been a while since I looked at it, but I can ask for it again and have it reshared.
Yeah, I have a letter or an email from, you probably have it too, from the teacher at Ida B. Wells, saying it just does not work just to say classroom. They're doing all sorts of stuff out of the classroom. She said, please, please be courageous and pass something that's always, all day. And the research shows, I've been reading a lot of the research that we are not taking something away from these kids, we're giving them something by letting them be away from their phones. So I really think morally, we need to take it away. We've got research that shows us, and we're just waffling, and I don't.
Well, we're not waffling, we're having a discussion
Okay,
about
we're
where
having
everyone
a,
is.
yes, we're having a discussion.
And Patty, I'm with you as well. I feel like we do need to be courageous, just like you don't ask a 3-year-old what time their bedtime should be. I feel morally obligated to do something, particularly because it's our students that are the lowest performing, that will see the most gains just with that piece of information. But also, I'm reading The Anxious Generation right now, and the data it's really compelling about the benefits of just having 6 hours away from your phone. It's super compelling. If you have time to look at the book, I highly recommend it. And I would be in favor of establishing a really strong value statement that we care about the kids that aren't performing very well, and this is what we're doing about it. And everyone else, for that matter.
Right. I'm reading that book too. It really gets you.
Okay, so Michelle is,
Student.
for all day. I'm assuming, what about school activities or just school hours?
I think if it's after school, I would be a little bit looser about it. If they're after school, they're engaged in some kind of a socializing or whatever, but it's really the off during the school day that I'm the most concerned about.
Okay. Andrew?
When active learning and instruction is happening.
Thank you, Michelle. JJ?
Yeah, I just had a question regarding, I know one of the restrictions said school activities, and so is school activities including like after school clubs, events, and like sporting events as well?
Yes, if you'd be on school grounds.
Yeah, but is it, like my question was like, will phones be banned like for like clubs, like sports and like after school events in general? Like, cause I know one of the restrictions says school activities.
Well, if a majority of the board decided that's what we're trying to get a sense of, but I would say right now, there doesn't seem to be support for restrictions outside of the school hours.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, I'm definitely not in support of, any restrictions after school hours, but I just wanted to raise a concern a student brought to me about how, I know at the high school level, high school students are allowed to eat off campus. I know some students are just kind of concerned about like the safety concerns, not being able to, say if they have to like call the police in a safety situation, they just felt very unsafe not being able to have their phones just when they eat off campus. But I just wanted to express that.
Great. Thanks, JJ. Gary?
Yes, couple things. One is Director Wong speaks about data that shows improved academic for our underrepresented kids, or the ones at the lower end. I would love to see that data because I know for the last week been like tearing through a lot of the data that we have. I've been looking at a lot of the data nationwide, and when we look at kids that's usually on the bottom piece, I haven't seen anywhere that showed the reason why or if improvement happened was because of cell phone bans. Now, I know there's a lot of opinions out there, absolutely. I know there's a lot of, pockets where people have done stuff, but I haven't seen anything nationally that shows a correlation between increased academic performance and the banning of cell phone usage. But I know there's a lot of opinions, and I've seen a lot of the opinions, but I haven't actually seen the actual data. When you look at least I haven't yet, when we're looking at the data across the nation around academic performance of kids, especially our Black and Brown Native American kids. So that's one. And if you have it, I would love to see it, because I'm like, if that data is correct, and we have a big enough data sample to say, hey, this is one thing that is actually helping, then I will be all for having a ban on having cell phones at all. period. The other thing is interesting because and this is one thing the director of the past said, she said, well, we wouldn't let our 3rd and 5th graders, pick what they want to eat. But yet, we let our students, and we have enough courage in our students for them to understand our experiment or whatever we do with gender identity. And so if they have the maturity and stuff to deal with that kind of stuff, why wouldn't they have the maturity to deal with making the right decisions on cell phones as well?
Some of the research, Gary, has shown that cell phones are actually addictive, so they don't have a lot of choice. So it's, there's so much out there that's very frightening that we don't really know. And the research that I've seen hasn't said so much about test scores as much as social emotional well-being, especially with girls, if you get rid of cell phones. And also that where it's most important not to have it is middle schools at puberty. That's when you really don't want cell phones. So that's another thing we need to look at.
Yeah, and I hear you, but I just don't want us to be speaking on the data like it's a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
When we don't have enough samples yet, and we don't have enough samples at all for PPS because this is only our first semester. So I just want to make sure that we're not stating our opinion as fact when we need to make sure that as schools, districts around the country, and I've been talking to school board members around the country, are starting to implement these things. I just don't want us to start saying facts that have not been proven yet.
Yeah, I agree.
I can share what the Anxious Generation says is that kids, the developing brain is operating in 2 modes largely, particularly like up through adolescence, and that's in discovery mode, and that's free from distractions and free from the addiction of having a phone. Just so it's either discovery or I'm forgetting the other one. It starts with the D, defense mode. When kids are on their phones, it shows them in defense mode, makes it harder for them to learn and take in new information, and also harder to develop the skills that they need with their peers where they're kind of growing at the same time. And the other thing about teenagers is, for anybody that's raised teenagers, they have a convincing argument about why, it should be okay to stay up till 3 a.m. or why, they shouldn't have protein for breakfast or whatever. So I think, teenagers, their job is to push back. But as adults, we have all survived this, and we need to be the adults in terms of being courageous about the outcomes that we want for our kids.
No, absolutely. And once again, I know that's one book, and I know there's been a controversy about that book as well. There's been some people who disagree with it. But once again, I don't care if one book says it or 3 books says it. Where's the data that shows improved academic performance for our kids? Because that's what we're saying. We're saying, well, if we do this, it'll be an academic improvement for our kids. All I'm saying is, where's that data at? That's all I'm saying. If that data is there, great, then let's move that way. But if data's not there, then we really need to make sure that we're doing something that's going to benefit kids and not just saying something that we hope or think will benefit kids. If we're talking about the data is there, but I haven't seen the data.
Yeah, Director Alex, I can share with you some that I've seen. Like, for example, in 2016, it's not just here and there, it's a whole country. The UK banned mobile devices in 2016, and then there's a study that was released the year after that showed that there was an significant increase in student test scores and hours of exercise.
Absolutely, and I've heard about that one. And the UK spends a lot more on their kids per student than we do too. And there's a lot of other societal stuff that the UK deals with that we don't. That we deal with that they don't. So I understand. You can look at Amsterdam. You can look at other schools, districts across the country. The rigor stuff are a little different than what we do here. So I'm looking for the data that's here in the United States that we're in that shows this.
Okay, I think I'm gonna ask Andrew to go next, but since we're not acting on it, since we're not acting on it, we have some time to get some data. So maybe Eddie and staff, we can see what we can find. Since it's an active conversation all across the US. I would think that if there's data, we will find it. Go ahead, Director Scott.
May I add one more thing? So Steve Jobs would not allow his kids to have smartphones. And I thought that was, this has been years now, but I thought that was also compelling. It's anecdotal, but that the developers of some of these technologies would not allow their own children access, to me says a lot.
I'll be quick. I definitely support cell phones off during class time. And I think I probably could get to cell phones off during the entire school day. And again, it's important to me that the AD deal with the specifics, but I think as a board, that is the kind of difference in policy in terms of what we're passing. But I think I could get there for a variety of reasons. I wouldn't support it outside of that. I think, I don't see nearly as, again, it's sort of that academic focus. I don't see nearly as much of a problem with a kid, checking their cell phone during football practice or, during a club or something along those lines. I did want to just return, Eddie, to something you said, because I want to keep stressing, because I hear a lot, and I know you've heard even more than I have from teachers and administrators who are talking about how difficult this is to enforce, and they want us to pass something so they don't have to do that anymore. This cell phone policy won't work if teachers don't enforce it and administrators don't enforce it. It doesn't matter what we pass. And I guess I kind of want to disabuse folks of this notion. I don't know, and I'm trying to have some conversations too with administrators to figure out why is it so hard to enforce a school policy, right? That there are challenges that, and I don't want to minimize those challenges because we're hearing from folks of saying this is so hard to enforce, and school board, you better do something. I don't think us passing a district-wide policy is going to change how difficult this is to enforce on the ground. I know for a fact at least 2 of the high schools right now where I have some personal interaction with folks, the cell phone policies that those schools have enacted are not being enforced consistently. They're not being enforced, and even at Grant, I'm hearing the anecdotal stories of the kids who are getting around, what's happening there, and that's going to continue to happen. And so I guess I don't want to give anyone a false notion that we're going to pass something that's going to get easier for teachers. It's not. It's going to get harder, particularly if we say no cell phones at all during the school day. I guarantee whether we put them in pouches or, boxes or whatever, kids have burner phones. Kids will say, I don't have my phone. I didn't bring it today. And they're still going to have it in a backpack. So that enforcement is going to be key as we go through this.
So I'm just going to close out this section because I want to move on to the other section. So I will say that I could maybe get there for all day for middle school. I think as long as we have open campuses, I think it's unrealistic. And I'm just going to reinforce what JJ said. So, I'm a parent of a student who was off somewhere on Powell Boulevard having lunch when there was an active shooter situation, and the lockdown locked students out. And, fortunately, students who were locked out and didn't know what to do had access to their phones. I just think as long as we have open campuses, it's awfully hard not to have high school students have their phones, or have access to the phones, or actually have needs for the phones. So that was, I think, a good discussion.
I got one more thing to say.
Okay, go ahead.
So, and I'm okay whichever way we go as far as whether it's just in school classes or if it's all day. I can get there either way. But the thing is, when we make this policy, what support are we going to give these schools? Because like Director Scott said, the teacher's still going to have to enforce this stuff, but there could be ways that we help mediate that as well as a board. And I'm talking about dollars, right, whether it's yonder pouches or whatever. So whatever policy we're making, we have to make sure that we are going to follow that up with support, which might mean it might need financial support. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to pass a policy that's not enforceable because certain schools don't have resources to do what they feel like they need to do to comply with the policy.
Okay, that's a good segue, Gary, because that is number 5. But first we're going to go, and I don't think this section will take long. So this is the exceptions, and what I would suggest is in the policy.
Excuse me, Chairperson Edwards.
Yep.
Can I add something? Sorry, I know. Back to like the other topic, kind of just adding on to what Director Scott was saying. You know, I know we spoke with about the film policy with the district student council, and they also expressed how even though their schools have their own policies, it's not being consistently enforced in their schools. You know, some teachers are more stricter, some teachers are more lenient. You know, our students are just seeing this directly happening at almost, I believe, we have representation for almost all of our high schools, and so basically all of our representatives from the high schools are saying they see this issue happening.
Great, thank you. I was going to go next to the nature of exceptions, and we've had some discussion in committee about the nature of exceptions, and you'll see listed here, I think, 3 of the 4 exceptions are ones in which we've had, I think, like just general agreement that, which is the IEPs, the 504s, academic activities, and then, individual students needing ELL assistance, like using a translator function on their phone, and then alternative programs where you might have teen parents or, frankly, students who are 19 or 20. The one place we haven't necessarily had a discussion about is academic activities, like, say you had a yearbook class and you want to take pictures or video, and how you would utilize that. But what I'd like to suggest is that instead of putting them in policy, what we would put in policy is that there will be some exceptions in these 4 broad categories, and then the administrative directive would have the ability to flesh them out with all the details, and also could be flexible enough that they could be changed as we learn from that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's fine to list the categories we know about. I would also include language that says there may be other exceptions as determined, by the superintendent. Just, again, the things we may not think
Catch-all
about.
category.
But otherwise, yeah, I think it makes sense to have the details in the AD. I mean, I'll just give an example. My daughter took a cell phone photography class. She loved it. I hope that class doesn't go away.
So that would be in the policy?
It would say there will be some exceptions in these categories along with the catch-all category, and then the AD would spell out what those are. Any issue with that? Again, this would probably be 2 sentences. I don't imagine, well, plus the.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just separating policy from AD and how that should be. But
right. I mean,
I think
I'll just say the
somebody
IEP
knows how to do it.
504, I don't think you want the board should not be writing that. And I say, we're going to learn some things that we, just in terms of the implementation, that we want to be flexible and not have to keep coming back. Okay. The next category is consequences for student misuse. And we didn't have a lot of board feedback on this. I will say, I think what we consistently heard, or I heard anyway, in the committee was, continuing to use the students' rights and responsibility versus setting up some other structure for cell phone. It should be treated just like anything else, and not have a separate set of consequences that are set in the policy that are different from the students' rights and handbook.
Yeah, I just had a quick comment. If we do something about this in the policy, I would like it to focus or to I don't know how to say it, to be focused on not that consequences should be non-punitive because, you know, one of the things about the issues with cell phones is the apps and stuff like that. They use, a lot of addiction science, right? There's an addictive nature to it. So like, and we know that the best way towards treating that kind of behavior is through treatment, not through punishment. And if there are, if there are schools that, for example, maybe their schools are not as up to the latest in terms of, right. So I like that reference to the Student Rights and Responsibilities Handbook, because I feel like the Students' Rights and Responsibilities Handbook does have specific language about proper consequences. But, like if it does become a problem where the type of discipline used in different schools is differing and maybe not following best practices, then that's something that should be addressed. So I still veer that should be something addressed in the AD, but also open that if there's some problems that do occur down the line, that the policy, I would be in favor of a policy stating that if there are problems down the line, this needs to be looked at, and, nothing specific, but just, yeah.
Well, the value of serving on the board for 4 years, if there's problems down the line, you can correct it. For me, again, this would be another case of, I think, a very short, section, maybe 2 sentences that just indicating that we don't have a special set of discipline for, violating the cell phone policy, but that we utilize the Students' Rights and Responsibility Handbook, and that you could have another value judgment or statement of reduce or minimize loss of instructional time and maybe to be non-punitive, but again, not to create something new in policy. And the Students' Rights and Responsibility Handbook is periodically updated, so those are opportunities, and also it has escalating, it already takes into account all the different things that students do that may require there to be some rights and responsibilities exercised. So it seems like the structure is already there. Michelle or Gary or Andrew?
I think that one thing that I'm concerned about as I was reading through the policies is that it seems like there is a stepped, sort of a tiered or progressive discipline. I would just want us to track how that discipline is being meted out. It would be really interesting to me to track if it's definitely our lowest performing students and they're losing, well, I don't think any of the punishment, they're losing instructional time. It's more like they're putting their phone has to be confiscated until maybe a parent picks it up. But I'd still like to track the disciplinary data because I'm interested in who's being disciplined and who's not.
So Michelle, this would not have a, here's what happens to your phone if you violate the policy. That would,
having your parent have to come in is, I think, pretty steep.
well, but what I'm saying is that
no teenager wants that.
that would not, that kind of specific, like, here's a new form of discipline. That's what's suggested here, unless everybody has a different point of view, is that is going to rest with the school about what the consequences are. And I will say, with Students' Rights and Responsibilities, we already collect data on student discipline, and it's actually posted every year. So,
also, we also track contraband and searches, and so if cell phones are being confiscated, that's also tracked.
Okay, great. And I think it was where there was discipline that was progressive. The policies did spell out whether it was a tier 2 out of 3 offense or tier 1, and I thought that was helpful.
Andrew?
Yeah, I like just referring to the student handbook. And the other thing I guess I'll say is kind of similar to my comment about the teachers having to enforce it. I don't want to see loss of instructional time, but there are going to be instances where students need a strong level of discipline to make this effective. So I just think we need to be realistic. If schools or through the AD or through practice just choose not to put, consequences on this, then the policy will be violated. So I think we need to be realistic about the fact that if we're going to ban cell phones, there are going to be kids eventually who are suspended as a result of that. And it won't be first, or whatever, it'll go through the normal process, but eventually that's going to happen, and we need to be ready for that.
Right, and but they wouldn't be necessarily suspended because they're the phone. That would be for like insubordination, or
Yeah,
right. I mean,
because they had their phone.
Well, yeah, there's also different degrees, like,
Because the fifth time they violated it without paying attention or without,
Right.
just flagrantly doing it, right? So that's just a reality.
So it would be the AD that said, first time you reminded,
To the
second
parents.
time
it
you're
would,
blocked,
it would reference
all
the
that stuff.
Student Rights and Responsibility Handbook, which has a very detailed set of consequences for a whole host of different things.
yeah, and to add to your point, I mean, like, it will get really complicated. Like, for example, a student having confiscation because they're using their cell phone to bully is a completely different instance than, like, checking your text messages, right? And so I think that's a level of complication that the policy should
We're not
recognize.
going to do.
Okay. Anybody else on this topic? On the consequences for student misuse? Because I think we're coalescing around a reference to the Student Rights and Responsibility Handbook.
Yeah, I think something the district council raised, I think when we were looking at the policies from individual schools, I think something we noticed was in for schools who have yonder pouches, we just saw some inequities because if you break a yonder pouch, you have to pay. But for some schools, it's 60 or 75. So the district student council was just kind of concerned for students who aren't able to afford to kind of pay those fees if they break a yonder pouch.
Okay. Yeah, that was interesting, JJ, because when I was looking through all the just high school, individual high school policies, the ones that had some sort of mechanism for enforcement, most of the policy was about the thing versus about what the actual policy was. What counts as a scratch or, an inoperable amount. That's a great point. Thank you for raising that.
I'm agreeing with the Student Rights and Responsibility Handbook. I hope, and I'm and concurrent with what Director Scott was saying, there's going to need to make sure that we have consequences that make sure that the actions are not repeated, and so I think we need to just be prepared for whatever those are. But I encourage our staff and teachers and administration to make sure that those consequences are enough to where we don't get disregard of the policy.
Okay. So, I think we're at a natural stopping point, because also we're gonna, just as a reminder, the next meeting will have, student data. And the district supports, as you can see, most of the items are, fall into other categories, whether it be budget or, how we resource things. So it's almost a whole different topic. So I think I'm going to stop here. I appreciate everybody's feedback. I think we have some consensus in most areas, which will be great. And we can maybe come back with some draft language around the places where we think there's consensus, and the places where we think there might be a lack of not yet consensus. So move on to the next agenda item, and just briefly, sorry. We have two policies that have been referred to the board for first reading: the high school credit earned prior to ninth grade and diploma requirements policies. Roseanne, did we have any public comment on either one of those? I want to note for everybody that in the high school credit earned prior to ninth grade, there was a new staff report that came through that's in the packet that has staff feedback on, or an additional a section with additional information that was based on some public comment that was brought up, and it's basically staff's response to the public comment. It's not a suggestion for changing the policy at all, but it was responding to somebody who asked a question about why is something missing, and staff is responding to that. So I just call everybody's attention to that. Doesn't necessitate any sort of modification of the policy, and thanks staff for providing that. And then I'm just going to note on the diploma requirements policy, I talked to Director Hollins, who had raised a separate issue at the last board meeting that's a pretty major topic, which was whether we should have some sort of proficiency standard in our diploma policy, and asked Director Hollins if he has a proposal to bring it forward that we would look at separately, as a general matter of policy. We the changes that are currently under contemplation are required by law, so we're going to go ahead and keep moving those forward. But Director Hollins, if you want to bring a proposal forward, we'll put it on the agenda and start a discussion. Like I say, I think it's a very large topic. Not that we can't tackle it, because I know it's something that came up in Director Wong's committee earlier. So moving along, number 5.
May I add one, or make a request? In the high school credit earned before 9th grade, there was one edit that I failed to include in the revision, and that's under 1B. Thank you. Staff would like to change the language from accelerated classes to advanced classes. So it's just a single word change.
Okay, is there any objection from the committee? Is there any objection to everybody to just incorporating that as a non-substantive change in the first read document? I'm seeing nodding here. Michelle, Gary, JJ, and Amy.
Can you repeat the item number?
Yes, it's in 1B.
What B?
1B, and it's allowing students to participate in more advanced classes as opposed to in more accelerated classes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm fine.
Okay, then we'll just.
Yeah, I'm fine with that change.
Great, we'll incorporate that in. So the next agenda item, and I'm just going to take a few minutes, as I noted on the agenda, just a preview for a future discussion. A student raised the topic, and they brought it up during public comment, and then subsequently have asked for consideration in this committee. And I don't know that it's a policy discussion, but I just want to flag this issue of access for freshmen to have access to AP. A lot of, some of our main materials on the website are very explicit that it's open to 9th graders. When students have tried to register for classes, they've been told that they can't register as a freshman, and that just because it's on the website doesn't mean it's a policy, or that the district has to follow it. So I would like to have a discussion about it at a future meeting, and it could be just understanding whether this is actually, I know we have policies relating to student access to classes and equitable access, and so it may not be a change in the policy, but just understanding whether we actually are following our policies.
Well, we do have staff here today who can speak to this today, if you'd like.
I don't want to get into, because we have another big topic that I want to get to, but I just want to flag what that topic is that's been raised, and I think we should, out of respect for students who raised the issue, and it does say on our website, there's a slide deck, and who can take AP classes at PPS, and the very first sentence says, all students, grades 9 to 12, and yet students are not being allowed to take those classes. So we can make time at the next meeting, or we can get a staff memo on how it complies with our policies.
Can I just add my voice to that request? I would love to understand more, and there may be very good reasons for it and very good academic reasons for the reason why freshmen can, and I didn't know we had that policy. I will tell you just from personal experience, it was surprising to learn that when my kids went to high school, that they were not allowed to take AP courses. I will also say my niece specifically transferred out of PPS to Lake Oswego because she was not allowed to take AP courses her freshman year. So again, not quite, there may be very good reasons, but I think it would be great for the board to hear what those reasons are, whether they're still relevant, whether that's still a good policy. And then to your point, if it is, then we should change what we have on the website. So I'm just adding my voice. I think it'd be a great board conversation.
Okay, so just a preview, and I say this was brought up by a student that there was room in the classroom and in the class, and there were no required prerequisites, so met the requirements that he could have taken it and was just denied access to it.
And you're saying our policy says you can, correct?
Well, I'm just saying on our website, basically the AP website, it says, I can send the link around, there's a slideshow that basically said
says
everybody
yes.
can take it.
Okay.
AP classes are for students in grades 9 to 10. They are not only for students with the best grades, anyone who is confident, motivated, and ready to enroll in AP classes.
Yeah, that sounds like
So we can talk about
Pretty
more,
simple.
maybe what might be useful, like just to tee up that conversation. Okay, with that, I want to turn the meeting over to Director Scott. The next agenda item is the policy 1.20.10. This deals with all the Board of Education, but also includes how board members are elected. And I had just raised at the last board meeting, as the city has gone to district voting. We had looked at this previously and just interested in the topic again and getting data. Director Scott led a task force, and he also made a very the presentation at the National School Boards Association, along with the district staff who worked on this policy. And so I asked Director Scott to tee things up. Everybody has in their it's been posted, the census redistricting study, which really was the impetus for the task force work that Director Scott led, that was, how do we rebalance after this census? And then the second question we had was, do we want to change how we're voting? Right.
Great, happy to do it. It's about a 45-minute presentation, so settle in. I'm gonna shorten it to about 5, I hope. And Roseanne, hopefully if we can bring up the presentation that Kate Wilkerson and I did, both for National School Board Association Conference and then also we did at OSBA. Although, it's funny, NSBA we had a full room of people, and OSBA we had 3. So I don't know what that says, but, and Roseanne, actually, if you can, I'm going to skip through, so you have this presentation. Kate's section was really the first sort of 18 or 19 slides, where she went through a lot of legal background and different case law. I'm not going to even try and do that. So Roseanne, if you wouldn't mind going to slide 20.
I'm just curious, does anybody in Oregon do zones?
I can't say definitively, but what we have heard is that nobody knows of a district that does zones. When we sort of ask them, there may be, but it's all kind of consistent. So I'll go really quickly, and actually that's 19. I think we go to the next slide, and actually the next one after that. We don't need to see our pictures. This was really about sort of what we did in that task force, and what was really interesting for me, and I think the board had a similar experience, was when when I got elected, we have this system where you have to live in your zone and you get elected, district-wide, which seemed odd to me. And I also knew a little bit just from history that, I know that similar systems are actually unconstitutional, and they have been ruled unconstitutional in some southern states. And so, when I got on the board and we finally had a chance to turn to this, we sort of started looking at this. And the reality is that, the system that we have here, they have a very racist history, right? So they started in Reconstruction, after slavery, and it was really a way to keep black people from getting elected to office. So, that the idea was that if you had smaller zones or districts that were predominantly people of color, you would have them elect people of color, and white majorities in a lot of those southern states did not want to see that. So we should just say right up front, this system has a very racist past and a racist history. And what was interesting for me as we went into it, I kind of thought, well, we should change that, right? There's a bad history here. It's much harder to run district-wide, and so we should change that. And the 2020 census and redistricting was a good opportunity, to do that. I will say one of the bullets on here that I talk about is we really thought the community board would rally behind this effort to change this historically racist system, but in reality it was a little more complicated. So next slide. And Roseanne, are you able to click on that hot link? In the, oh yeah, you can go to the next slide on gentrification in Portland. Are you able to click on that? And is it still live? I think it is. So, again, you can click on that in the version you got. If you could scroll down just a little bit, what this, and it's been a long time since I did this, what this graph that the Oregonian actually published a while back shows is just gentrification in Portland, and what it shows is going from over time what's happened to communities of color, and what it shows, and again I won't spend a lot of time, is that what used to be predominantly sort of in northeast, these really robust, vibrant neighborhoods have been pushed into outer east, Portland, some other areas, but actually in some ways outside of PPS boundaries altogether. And what we used to be a very diverse district, and we are less so as a result. And that's shown on the next slide. If you go back to the PowerPoint. I'm so surprised the technology still works. It just totally terrified me when I was giving the presentation, like, would the hot link work? What this graph shows is going all the way back to 1972, black student enrollment in north and northeast schools, and then with a district total line running in there. And so you can see the blue line is black students in north and northeast schools. The red bar graph is all black students, and then the district total. And, I was surprised to learn just you had a little fluctuation back in the 70s, and then this sort of peak in the early 90s, and then this really dramatic decline, right? And again, which is just reflective of gentrification, in the city. And so sort of the next slide there, Roseanne, after going through this process and having this task force meet and looking at some of the data, what we really determined was the latest research is pretty unclear on the impact of at-large elections, and what and again, I don't want to overstate the data because the studies out there are pretty small, but what they're beginning to show is that what used to be a system that absolutely kept people of color from getting elected, that happened in areas in cities or districts where you had very concentrated groups of minority voters. Now that you have more dispersed groups of minority voters, these same at-large systems with this racist past actually may be resulting in more diverse people getting elected. And anecdotally, I don't want to say that's necessarily what's happened here in PPS, but anecdotally, when I started talking to some of our newly elected members, because again, when we started looking at this, we had a very diverse board, which has gotten even more diverse. In the meantime, I hope Herman doesn't mind me speaking for him, but, when I sort of said, hey, look, we should overturn the system. And he said, what are you talking about? He said, as I ran for re-election, or not re-election, ran for election, he said, I had black people all over the district saying, I am so glad that I get a vote for you. And so, in a conversation with Herman, he was pretty clear. He's like, don't touch a system that seems to be working. And so we really came out of it. I was surprised, right? I sort of changed my mind, going into it thinking we're going to get rid of it, to thinking actually what we don't want to do is accidentally harm our ability to have a really diverse board. And I think that's the conversation we had at the time, and was really about definitely not rushing in any changes. We ended up not making changes to the way we get elected. We did redraw a couple of the boundaries, which we had to do, as a result. And so, the takeaways we gave at the conference, which are the next slide, Roseanne. Sorry, I had some very rudimentary graphics in this. Was just, I know, very complicated stuff. Was just noting that, we hope that the community's goal and value is to have a board that reflects the diversity of the community. Every single community is going to have very different demographics and voting trends, and that, at-large voting may be different, disenfranchising minority voters, which I think it did for decades, for maybe 100 years, but it is also possible it could be empowering a collection of really diverse voices that have been scattered throughout development patterns and urban gentrification. And so our recommendation, our takeaway was to have a conversation with your community about the right path forward. So that was the presentation, and I think that again, from my perspective, it was sort of this thought of, let's make sure that whatever changes we make don't have unintended consequences, because I think everyone on this board has that same value of wanting a diverse board. And some of the other problems that we noted at the time were that it is hard to get elected district wide. It does cost more money, but taking care of that problem, we didn't want to accidentally end up, with again, a less diverse board in the meantime. Two other things I'll note that were not in the policy. We did talk to Multnomah County elections at the time, and if I'm recalling, and Liz, I can't remember if you did some of that outreach or someone else did, but my recollection at the time was they asked for at least a year minimum runway if we are going to make this kind of change. It's really extensive on their side to actually, we don't have any school district zoned elections right now. You have to live within the zone, but we don't actually send out ballots within the zone. And so
at the time they were staring down the changes to the citywide election, and they were putting in a new platform. So I think in opposite order, the platform first, and then these changes that were coming. We have since talked with them, and the latest word we have is mid to late November of this year would be the time they would have to know if we were going to make that change in order to have ballots for May. For May, okay, that's good updated information with the new system. So that was one consideration, is just the timing to make sure that we don't make a last minute change that messes things up. And then the other thing I will say, this is just a personal view, I think we need to be really thoughtful about when we change our elections, and I'm more putting this now in a national context, that we are seeing throughout the nation changes to election rules and laws that are being put in place to affect the outcome. And I think the people doing it are kind of being pretty open and blunt about the fact that they are trying to affect the outcome, whether when you can vote, or absentee ballots, or redrawing districts, or gerrymandering, all those other things. And so that's the other thing I would say is, to the extent we make changes to the way we do elections, I would want to be really thoughtful. I would want to have a lot of community input around that, and I would want to make sure that we're giving a lot of lead time, so that it's not a last minute change, that people sort of understand what that means and the impact it might have. And it was longer than 5 minutes, I'm sorry, but less than 45.
That's great guidance, and just sharing out. I would think one of the, we'll give people an opportunity to ask you questions, but one of the things that I'd like to do is just get more data. I think it's interesting, so I feel like I've seen some of the ebbs and flows at PPS since 2000. I served on a diverse board in 2001, and then when I got on the board again in 2017, you had one person of color on it, so much less diverse. And then obviously a change over time. When I look at the data, I do see some of our communities of color who are actually a pretty large percentage of the, relatively large percentage of the district, who haven't had representation historically, never more than one Latino at a time, I think only two in total. One of the things I also was thinking is like going back and talking to previous board members who had served, and the challenges and advantages, just to get a broader timeline, but also to look through the data, and then also look through the data around when we have contested contested races, what sort of outcomes you see when they're contested races, how much money gets raised. I mean, certainly one of the things with the city moving to zoned races, they also moved to also small donor elections, which sort of also takes care of like another big hurdle. So I'm not at all suggesting that PPS start that, nor do I think there would be a lot of support for spending public dollars in the campaigns. But those are two ways that, the City of Portland Charter movement tried to make the offices more accessible, is that first you'd have a district versus running citywide, and then the challenges of raising money to be competitive, they brought that forward. So I thought it just might be interesting to pull some just historic data from PPS races for people to look at.
I want to say we have a really challenging state history in terms of land use, and specifically that, this was a state that was founded as a white utopia and discouraged Black people from being here, whether they were enslaved or not. And so we still have some of those legacy pieces of like practice in place. We, I think right now, have the most diverse board the school district has ever had, which I think is a win, and I think reflects our community's values. We started talking about equity not that long ago. We didn't talk about it in 2000. We weren't talking about racial equity. It's now a bigger part of the broader conversation, and so I do feel like our board currently reflects the community's values. Now, do we have a one-to-one relationship with, how many Native Americans and how many African Americans? I don't think that's the case, but the bottom line is the board is more diverse overall. I think there's also key differences, and Director Scott, you brought this up, between Portland and Pearland, or the case study that you used. The southern states have a completely different relationship with race and land use than we do here, and we're still thinking about it. And in fact, the amount of displacement that has happened in inner city Portland, specifically in Jewish and Italian neighborhoods downtown, south of downtown, and the interstate corridor urban renewal area that's resulted in a gross loss of population, Black population near where I live, would really it would dilute. If this was a zoned race, it would probably dilute the diversity and the outcome of who the community, the values of our community, to have diversity on our board, and our board reflects that value. So I think the historical context is important, maybe for having a couple data points, but really looking to the future and the future projection about where racial residential land use lands in Portland, because of housing costs, I think would be really important to look at too. More of a projection in the future than a look back into an older time, a time when we weren't talking about diversity. So that's my 2 cents.
I'm gonna add a couple more cents onto Director DePass's comments.
Add 5 cents.
When we were talking about this back, when I think it was a couple years back, we looked at it, and I think and I've been talking to some of the elders that's here in Portland, and I think zoning would have been a great idea 20 years ago. Right, it would have been a great idea, but the powers that be didn't want that because of the racist pieces, that they did not want Black in leadership. They did not want Blacks on boards, and so because of that, the push for zonings before never happened, and so now that we are looking at that, and with the gentrification that's happened, and Director Green was absolutely right. There were people all over the city that was able to vote for me. They was able to help support me, put line signs out all over the city versus just in my zone to help us get elected. And if we look at the outcome of our board today, right, if we are one of the most divorced boards today, we have to ask ourselves, why is that? What happened, right? What happened to the reason why we're like that versus, you know, when you're talking about 2000 and the 60s and all that stuff, when it was not that, right? And so I think when we're looking at voter suppressions throughout the country right now, where they're trying to do different things, we don't want to inadvertently do that here, especially when we're just now getting to a time where equity is the forefront and diversity is the forefront, especially in a state like Oregon and specifically Portland, where we're seeing a lot of the diversity and the equity inclusion things go wayside. They're disappearing, you know, from everywhere. Government, they're disappearing from corporate, right? They're disappearing from that, and Oregon is and Portland specifically is in this zone or a bubble right now where we still value that, right? And we still value pieces. We value diversity. We value equity. We value, you know, looking at things through different lenses, right? We value other people's experiences. And I think if we're moving to a zone piece, we're actually inadvertently going back to that time where Blacks, Latinos, Asians was left out of things because of where we are today. And so that's just kind of my thought on that. When we're talking about, you know, raising funds for money, that's going to be the same for at least a minority as it is whether we're doing citywide or district-wide. Now, we might not have to spend much, but, you know, we have very limited African-American population here in Northeast Portland, and I don't know what the Asian and the Latino population is, but it's low. So even if the issue of raising money is going to always be a challenge for us, it's going to always be a challenge that we have to get every day because we don't have that disposable income. We don't have that generational wealth that others have to do that. So that's going to always be an issue no matter what. And so I just close and say, you know, I think where we're at, the values of our city right now, I think that the values of our city are reflecting in who's on the board, and we can see that when we look at each other at the diocese, you know, in and out each and every week. Thank you.
Yeah, I like the at-large idea mainly because then everybody knows you're representing all the schools in the whole district. And there was a quote in here on your presentation that I thought was interesting. It says, at-large districts lead to overrepresentation of minority voters where racial minority groups are a small part of the population or where Democratic voters make up a larger proportion of the population. And that's what we are. So, and it looks like that's what happened. So it's interesting.
Thank you.
I guess I want to just note one thing. I think everybody it would be good to look at the packet because actually we have a fairly large Latino population across the district, relatively speaking. It's the largest community of color, and I think the two Latinos who have been on the district board, one was Martin Gonzalez, who was appointed, and then I believe he won a race, and then he was defeated by Steve Buell with a decided money differential, and then the second was Julia Esparza Brown. So just noting that, and the second largest group is 2 or more races. So just
and Hispanics are growing, you know, nationally as well. It's just a fast-growing, you know, voting population. They tend to be younger, and yeah, we definitely want to pay attention to that. And maybe we make the job easier for people who want to be interested in serving, rather than redrawing lines. Because also that population is spread throughout the city. I don't know specifically if there are pockets. I mean, there are pockets in Cully, but that's a population that's spread throughout the city, much like other populations are sort of dispersed now. We don't have our little ethnic enclaves like in the good old days.
Yeah, if you look at,
there was a time when I walked down the street, there was a time when there were no white people in my neighborhood. Not a one.
I say if you look at
and so it's a good thing because we have choice about where we can live now. You know,
If you look at the data, they do divide it by zone, so it's just worth looking at. I'm going to give Director Wong the last word and then close the meeting because we're over time.
Ooh, the last word. It'll be words, last words. I want to kind of continue what Director Hollins, what you kind of started going into, because I think it's important to kind of try to simplify this problem in what kind of problems we're trying to solve, right? So the way I see it, there's kind of two problems, right, that we're trying to talk about. One problem is diversity of the board. And like you said before, we don't know what the consequences of are going to zoning. Like we could unintentionally create it wasn't intentionally gerrymandered, but a gerrymandered system, right? Because it is now a separate zoning. And we don't know, I guess the point is, from Director
Scott gerrymandered it just
right.
for the record.
Right. Just what I'm just trying to say is that if we're trying to solve for diversity board, we don't know what the outcome is. And it's a big question mark. What Director Scott says, like, it seems like it is favoring for a more diverse board. So that's one problem we're solving, or trying to solve for, diversity board. Is it going to work or not? We don't know. Probably not. The other problem that we're trying to solve for is diversity in socioeconomic status, right? Like, we have a problem in most boards across unpaid board positions in that it's very difficult to get representation from people who can't normally afford to run for board. Would this solve for that? Well, I guess my concern is that it may make campaigning cheaper, but it doesn't make being on the board cheaper, right? So maybe you might initially get some people who are thinking about it, but then when they realize they have to go for 4 years in an unpaid position, that may already be the limiting factor that's bigger than the campaign. So again, I'm open to the idea, but the problem is, until we can solve that problem, there's the reasons, the compelling reasons is still too many question marks, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So I mean, that's the last word.
And there you have it from Director Wong. Okay. Without any other comments, I think we're adjourned. Sorry, it ran a little bit over. Thank you, Director Scott, for the presentation.
Bye. Thank you.